There are disasters that dominate headlines because of the scale of destruction they leave behind. Collapsed buildings, raging floods, cities torn apart by flame. And in those moments our attention is drawn, understandably, to the human lives lost and the families left behind to carry that grief forward. But not every tragedy announces itself in a way the world can easily recognise, and some unfold quietly behind closed doors in places built on trust and care, where what is lost is measured not in numbers, but in the depth of love that existed before it was taken. This is the story of Ponderosa Pet Resort, a place that was meant to be temporary shelter for those who waited faithfully to go home. Dogs have been with humanity for tens of thousands of years, longer than written history, longer than cities or laws or borders, shaped not only by survival but by companionship itself, evolving alongside us until their instincts became intertwined with our emotions, their safety bound entirely to our decisions. They learned to read our faces, to recognise sadness before words were spoken, to wait patiently by doors when we left, not because they understood time, but because hope told them we would always return, as we always had before. For many people, dogs are not accessories to life, but anchors within it, witnesses to private moments, companions through loneliness, illness, heartbreak and grief that no one else sees, offering comfort not through speech, but through presence, routine and unwavering loyalty. We love our dogs with a devotion that is woven into the fabric of our daily lives, a loyalty that shapes the rhythm of everything we do. Yet there are moments when responsibility asks us to trust someone else with what we cherish most, when work calls, when illness intervenes, or when distance makes it impossible to keep them by our side. In those moments the decision never feels simple or small, and leaving them in the care of a kennel is not an act of indifference, but an act of faith, a belief that the place we chose will offer warmth, routine and protection until we return. We pack their favourite blanket so they will not forget the smell of home. We tuck in the toy they only play with when we are watching, and we whisper promises we fully intend to keep. We surrender control because we believe they will be treated with the same patience and kindness we give them ourselves, and that the life that depends so completely on us will be safe until we come back to bring them home again. It's only right that we spend time searching for the right place and the right people, reading reviews, asking questions, and imagining what their days will look like in our absence, because when it comes down to those we love, only the best will ever feel good enough. For many, that place was Ponderosa Pet Resort in Georgetown, Texas, a facility that presented itself as more than just a kennel, but as a second home for dogs whose families needed to be away for a little while. It was described as a place of open spaces and structured routines, where dogs could be boarded overnight, exercised during the day, and kept on familiar schedules meant to ease the anxiety of separation. To worried owners, it offered reassurance in the form of professional care, secure enclosures, and the promise that their companions would be watched over while they were gone. A setting that seemed designed not just for containment, but for comfort, where the wait to go home would be filled with routine rather than fear. On September the 18th, 2021, the kennels at Ponderosa Pet Resort followed a familiar and comforting routine, with mornings filled by arrivals and departures, the exchange of leashes and paperwork, and the gentle chaos of barking excitement as dogs were settled into their spaces. Staff moved through the building checking on each animal, refreshing water bowls, serving meals, and guiding dogs outside for exercise, while owners went about their days believing their companions were being cared for. As evening approached, the pace slowed. The final pickups were made and the lights inside the facility were dimmed to signal rest rather than play, leaving behind a building full of breathing, sleeping dogs waiting for morning, wrapped in the quiet trust that comes from routine and the expectation that tomorrow would begin just like today. But it didn't. In the quiet hours of the night, when the building was dark and the dogs were sleeping, a fire began somewhere above them in the attic space of the facility, where it could smoulder unseen. Investigators later believed the fire began as a small electrical fault in the ceiling, growing unseen as it fed on dry materials above the kennels. As the smoke thickened and drifted downwards, it slowly changed the air the dogs were breathing. Long before the flames ever became visible, and inside their enclosures, confusion likely came before fear, as unfamiliar smells replaced the ordinary scents of food and bedding, and the quiet of night was broken by coughing, whining, and restless movement. Ponderosa Pet Resort, like many boarding facilities, was not staffed around the clock, and once the doors closed for the night and the last lights were dimmed, there was no one inside to hear distress or see the first signs of danger, leaving the building full of sleeping animals without human presence until morning. Just before 11 o'clock that night, the Georgetown Fire Department began receiving multiple 911 calls, each one reporting smoke and flames rising from a place that was never meant to be the scene of an emergency. Fire Chief John Sullivan would later say, "My heart just dropped when we got the address and I knew exactly what location we were going to." 25 firefighters responded to the call, racing towards Ponderosa Pet Resort and arriving within 4.5 minutes, only to find what he described as the worst-case scenario, with heavy smoke pouring from the building and flames already taking hold inside. They forced their way in despite the conditions, moving into a space filled with heat and toxic air, knowing that every second mattered and fearing even then that they might already be too late. Firefighters fought the blaze for hours before it was finally brought under control, but when the smoke cleared, the outcome was devastating. All 75 dogs who had been boarding there that night had lost their lives. Chief Sullivan later explained that it did not appear most of them had been killed by the flames themselves, but by the smoke, saying that many animals exposed to carbon monoxide will grow weak and fall asleep before they ever feel fire. A description meant to explain what happened, but unable to soften it in any way. The Georgetown Fire Chief said that they could have likely saved some of the lives if they knew sooner. The fact that a fire got as large as it did before 911 was accessed had everything to do with the fact there were no overnight staff, no cameras or monitoring systems, no alarms, heat detectors or carbon monoxide detectors, nor were there any automatic release pen doors installed. The absence of safeguards and human presence that night would become one of the most painful truths for the families to confront, because it meant the disaster had been allowed to grow in silence long before anyone could call for help. And when the fire was finally discovered and its full weight became clear, attention turned to the place itself, to how it had come to exist, and to the man who had built it and now had to answer for what had happened within its walls. Ponderosa Pet Resort offers training and grooming as well as boarding and was founded over 10 years ago by owner Philip Paris, a dog trainer and former City of Georgetown police officer. He was contacted immediately, and in the days that followed, Paris offered a statement to the community expressing sorrow and empathy for the families devastated by what had happened. "I am emotionally overwhelmed by the accidental fire on Saturday night at our business. 59 families are affected and their best friends won't be coming home. As a dog owner, I feel their heartbreak intensely." For the owners, grief quickly became questions. How could one fire take at least 75 animals? And why were 59 families left to return to homes that felt suddenly empty? Only later did it seem obvious to ask why there had been no overnight staff and no alarm systems in place. Questions that rarely surface when all you are trying to do is find a safe place for a dog you love. Even though the website stated, "We do not have staff on site 24 hours a day. We believe that pets sleep better at night when everything is dark, peaceful and quiet," it was easy to overlook, because trust is easier than doubt when you believe you are choosing care. Richard and Pam Richard had just been married on Friday when they boarded their 2 puppies, Bunny and Clyde, a pair that had always been inseparable from the beginning, always running and playing side by side and scheduled to be picked up together on Sunday. In the days that followed, the family found a small measure of comfort in knowing the puppies had not been alone, that even in fear they had been together, just as they had been in life, because as Richard said, they were meant for each other. For Samantha O'Connor, the loss of her dog Canelo carried a different kind of weight, one that lingered for years, as she could not bring herself to watch his videos for more than 2 years after his death, remembering him only as a pure soul whose absence left a quiet space nothing else could fill. Another owner would later describe learning about the fire in the most painful way possible, not through a phone call or a knock at the door, but through a post on social media while they were still out of town visiting family, the first trip they had taken since the pandemic began. They had trusted Ponderosa with their dog and his brother, believing they would be safe until they returned. only to receive a call hours later telling them that every dog inside had died. At home, the silence felt unbearable, so much so that they put away bowls and toys because seeing them hurt too much, clinging instead to small things that remained, a few strands of fur, a bedsheet that still carried a familiar scent. They spoke of pain and anger in the same breath, of wanting answers not only for themselves, but because they could not bear the thought of anyone else living through the same kind of loss. One grieving owner wrote online, "My beautiful babies were taken last night by a fire at the Ponderosa pet resort in Georgetown. My family is completely heartbroken and we will never be the same. I feel like I'm in a nightmare and can't wake up. I love you forever, my sweet angels. I'm so sorry." These feelings were repeated again and again in interviews, on social media, and in private conversations with family and friends. And as the details of that night became known, public sorrow began to turn to anger, especially when word spread that Philip Paris intended to reopen the facility just days after the fire. Many people felt that what had happened was not just an accident, but the result of choices that left animals unprotected, and they did not hide their outrage. One grieving parent spoke of trying to explain to a 4-year-old why his best friends were not coming home, while questioning how frightened the dogs must have been in their final moments, and condemning the absence of overnight staff, sprinklers or monitored alarms, pointing out that the fire had only been discovered because a passerby happened to see it. For many, the loss of their dogs was inseparable from the belief that safeguards should have been in place, and that those responsible needed to answer for decisions that had cost so many lives. Once the fire was out and the smoke had cleared, an investigation began almost immediately, with officials searching for answers inside what remained of the kennel. In the days that followed, they would conclude that the blaze most likely began as an electrical malfunction and spread unnoticed through the structure. What the investigation revealed was not only how the fire began, but how unprotected the dogs had been. There were no working smoke or fire alarms inside the building because a system that had once been installed had been disconnected, and there were no staff on site or monitoring the facility when the fire started, leaving no one to see the danger as it grew. The building also had no sprinkler system to slow the spread of the flames, a fact officials were careful to explain was not required under fire code for a structure of its size, even as families struggled to understand how a place filled with living, breathing animals could be left so vulnerable. While investigators found no formal fire or building code violations, the tragedy would still lead Georgetown to update its regulations, a change born not from prevention, but from the lives that had already been lost. The settlement, described as the largest known for dogs lost in a kennel fire, comes as advocates push for stronger legal protection for pets in Texas. Current state law treats pets as personal property, limiting compensation to market value. Attorney Ard Ardalan, representing the families, is urging the Texas legislature to allow pet owners to seek actual damages, including veterinary expenses and compensation for mental anguish against negligent pet care facilities. As the families searched for justice and pushed for laws that would recognise the true emotional cost of what they had lost, the weight of that night was felt even by those who had responded to the fire itself. For the people who witnessed the aftermath firsthand, the tragedy was no longer just a case or an investigation, but a reminder of how deeply dogs are woven into the lives of people who love them. "We encourage people not to minimise this," Sullivan concluded. "It's a big deal when you lose an extension of your family. My heart goes out because it was unfair that I could go home last night and give my dog Rockford the biggest hug possible. He's my comfort, he's my confidant. And many of these family members have had that ripped out from them now." People rallied in a way that reflected both grief and determination, turning sorrow into action almost immediately after the fire. Community members organised vigils and memorials, gathering with candles, photos and leashes to honour the dogs who never came home, while strangers left flowers and notes outside the burned facility as if it were a gravesite. Online, thousands of people shared the story, spreading the families' voices far beyond Georgetown and transforming private loss into public awareness. Someone even started a GoFundMe page to have pet portraits made for each of the families, raising thousands of dollars to do so. At the same time, anger became fuel for advocacy. Pet owners signed petitions, wrote to lawmakers, and supported the families' legal efforts, calling for stronger fire safety rules for boarding facilities and for changes in Texas law that treated animals as property rather than members of a family. Fundraisers were created to help cover legal costs and memorial expenses, and some people who had never met the families donated simply because they understood what it meant to love a dog. What began as individual heartbreak became a collective movement, one driven by the belief that the 75 dogs should not be remembered only for how they died, but for the change their loss might bring, and for the reminder that love for animals can unite people who have never met in a shared demand for protection, dignity, and accountability. That morning in Texas, 75 dogs were waiting to go home, but home never came. This video for me has probably been one of the more difficult that I've ever had to do. That's because I'm very much a dog lover myself. I in fact have 5, and sometimes they do go into kennels, and the thought of what happened in this terrible tragedy is quite frightening. In spite of the tragedy, I hope I presented the information in an understandable way, as sad as it was. I look forward to seeing you on the next one, and I'll wish you bye-bye for now.